Howdy, y'all. Caleb here. Today we're looking at the Carnosaur and which one is worth the points to put into your list, Scarvet or Oldblood. And we're going to look at some comparisons today, see which one comes out the best, which one is the Beastmaster. One of the big reasons I wanted to do this video is because we have a new mount trait from the White Dwarf, and that is called the Beastmaster, and it is for Coalesced only, but it gives us some flexibility with the Carnosaur that we didn't have before, and that is we have the ability with Beastmaster to make our Carnosaur go swift, and it can run and still shoot and or charge in the same turn, or you can add one to the attacks for that model. And so that gives us some flexibility here, and I think that adds a little bit of a new dimension to the Carnosaur, and that we can buff it up very easily without spending some extra command points, or if we need that flexibility, we can also run and shoot and charge with it, which we've only really been able to do with our Stegodons up to this point. And so it's pretty nice that we can do that with a Carnosaur now. Being able to run and still charge is a big deal in this game, especially when movement is king. And so you're looking for ways to get across the board to where you need to go. In Thunder Lizards, you got to be able to do that on the ground. No teleporting in Thunder Lizards. And so, and Coalesce if you're playing Kotal's Claw or something. So this mount trait is good, and it goes on a Carnosaur very well. I think a lot of times you're going to end up putting this on a Stegodon, either the Engine of the Gods or the Stegodon Chief. I think you just get more bang for your buck out of that. But if you're looking for that right fit for 215 points or 270 points, maybe the Carnosaur is where we put this. The Carnosaur does have some downsides. I want to hit on some of those real quick because I feel like it was still kind of designed in the last edition of Age of Sigmar. It really has a lot of command abilities throughout the book and throughout its war scrolls that are really made to stack on top of each other, and we can't do that anymore. One of those is the Scarvet's command ability, and that it allows you to explode all your sixes to hit. Well, that's nice, and that's a good command ability, but we've already got that on our Celestite weapon. So any weapon that the hero has on top of the Carnosaur is already exploding. And so because of the new rules in 3.0, those sixes to hit only explode one time, and so you only get that explosion once. So already his war scroll is kind of conflicting with the command points that you get to spend. We see the same thing with the Oldblood. The Oldblood's command ability is +1 to hit, which is a great command ability, but that's already a generic command ability. And so we can already get that anytime we want. And so his war scroll is kind of wasted command ability there. Also, it fights against some of the things on its war scroll. So like the Jaws, if you're fighting models that have 7 or less wounds, you're already getting +1 to hit. And so it's kind of already taken away the one big hit, the one big melee profile we have already has +1 to hit. And so there's not as much need to use that command ability, even if you have an Oldblood, because you're going to be fighting an Oldblood against something that has 7 or wounds or less. Because we'll talk about it later, but a Carnosaur cannot kill big monster heroes and stuff like that. So you are going for those smaller units. So you're already getting that +1 to hit. So it's kind of in an odd place where it's fighting against itself on some of these abilities. Another downside is it's rend. The Carnosaur is not very... it doesn't hit very hard on the rend category. The only rend it has is the Jaws. There's one weapon that has rend, but when you're looking at the generic profile here, only the Jaws have rend, and it's only -1 rend, which is very easily negated in Age of Sigmar 3. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you're not going to take a Carnosaur into something that's real big and heavy, a big monster. You're looking for those softer targets to attack. A Carnosaur also brackets very easily. After it takes 3 wounds, it starts bracketing pretty hard. And by the time it gets down to about half wounds, you're going to be looking to spend that command ability in Gur that lets you fight full bracket, which is then kind of fighting against your other command abilities that you have. So it still has that old monster bracket where it brackets very quickly instead of like the newer monsters that kind of usually wait till about half damage to start bracketing. Weirdly, the Carnosaur, I feel like right now, really plays best in Thunder Lizards. Kotal's Claw is kind of hurting because of the command ability stuff. It's still playable. It's still fun, but it's not quite as competitive. I think you're going to see a Carnosaur more often in a Thunder Lizard list. Because Kotal Claw is, that the best ability there is that +1 to hit, which you can get so many other places. So I think it does play best in Thunder Lizard. The upsides to Carnosaur are it's extremely cheap. We're going to look a lot at the Scarvet on Carnosaur, and that one is only 215 points. When you're talking about a monster that has some decent damage, that has some decent abilities here, 215 points for a monster hero is a great price point. It's not as expensive as a Bastiladon. It's not as expensive as a Stegodon. So if you're looking for that right fit in your army, you've got 215 points left over, and you've got a hero slot. Throw this Carnosaur in there, and it will do some good stuff for you. It also does have a unique ability on its War Scroll that late game you can kind of run and charge. Once it's killed something in melee, you can run and charge with that Carnosaur. Now, you've got to actually get it into combat, so this isn't something you're going to be doing turn 1, which is what I really like this mount trait for, which we'll talk about that later. That gives you an ability to do that turn 1 if you want to. But late game, if this is still alive, it's quite flexible that you can still run and charge the rest of the game once it's killed something. So that is a pretty neat ability there. Something that a lot of times you have to pay for. You have to have support heroes. You have to find another way to do that. Carnosaur can do that once it's actually killed something. And so that's a pretty good ability. Let's look at the comparison here, because I think this is really, where you're looking at what am I going to bring on top of this Carnosaur? Am I building this right now? What am I looking at building? And the source Oldblood is 270 points. It's quite a bit more expensive than the Scar Veteran. Its biggest differences are its missile attack. It has a missile attack that's 18 inches, D6 attacks, 3s to hit, 4s to wound, -1 rend, 1 damage. And to be honest, it's not very good. It will average less than 1 damage to a 4-up save. And so it's not a very good missile attack. Do not consider that part of your strategy for this guy. Sometimes it'll do some damage. Most of the time, it's not going to do very much. It does have that command ability for +1 to hit. The Saurus Scar Veteran on Carnosaur is only 215 points, and its command ability is that 6s to hit explode. And so there is a pretty wide gulf there on points. When you're looking to squeeze every single point out of your list, getting this in at 215, I think is pretty much going to be the favored Carnosaur. It's cheaper. If I've got 270 points in my list, I'm probably taking an Engine of the Gods instead of a Carnosaur, because Engine of the Gods has just so much more utility. But if I'm looking to squeeze in a Carnosaur, the Scarvet at 215 points is great. Is good. It's good. It does have some base attacks here. The Jaws, 3 attacks, 4s and 3s, -1 rend, 5 damage. So that 5 damage is very juicy. That's what draws your attention, is a 5 damage attack. But it does hit on 4s. There's ways to buff that up, but hitting on 4s, that's pretty bad, especially when you have such low quantity of attacks, and especially at only -1 rend. Its claw attacks, 2 of them, 3s and 3s, no rend, 2 damage. And then it has a couple of different weapon profiles. You only have 1 on the Oldblood, but you have 3 different options on the Scar Veteran. I kind of broke these down just to see what kind of damage we'd be doing. And I assumed we're charging, because if you're not charging with this Carnosaur, then he's probably dead. +1 to hit. And of course, all of the Celestite weapons explode on 6s to hit. And when you math these out, the damage is actually pretty similar between what you would normally take on the what you have to take on the Oldblood, which is that 3 damage spear, and then the War Spear that's on the Scar Veteran. It has more attacks. When you charge, it does 2 damage. And it actually comes out about the same. It's 4 damage versus a 4-up save for both of those. The Great Blade and the War Blade on the Scarvet really aren't worth taking. They're quite a bit less damage. And so I like these attacks. I'm basically just taking the spear on either one of these. But I don't think there's enough here to justify the extra 55 points for the Oldblood. So in this comparison, I'm still favoring the Scar Veteran. So let's look at the average damages of a Scarvet. And this is basically just War Scroll here. Nothing special. We've kind of already talked a little bit on some of their attacks. We're just going to assume the War Spear on the Scar Veteran because it is a cheaper version of all of this. And I think we get about the same bang for our buck out of that one. But when we're just looking at the War Scroll, it's not very impressive. Let me tell you here. When you're looking at just the War Scroll, you're looking at not even quite 8 damage versus a 4-up save. And so this is not good average damage output, especially for 215 points. But you can buff it fairly easily. And if we just spend 1 command point, for our exploding 6s to hit, which I think you would end up doing on the Scar Veteran, since you can get +1 to hit on the jaws by just fighting something with 7 or less wounds. And so once you do that, you get a little bit better. You're at about 10 damage. But we can do better. If we throw this in Coalesce, and I'm going to show you a bunch of free buffs here. All of these things come out to be free. Now, we've already done the 1 command point, but that's all we're spending. All we're spending is 1 command point on the exploding hits to 6. We choose the correct target to attack. Now in Coalesce, we get +1 to our jaw attacks. Sacred Asterisms, we're going to flip it over if we know that we're attacking to this to +1 to attacks for our hero here. We've got Prime Warbeast, which gives us +1 to attack for the mounts. Beastmaster Mount Trait, which gives us another +1 to attacks for our mount. And we can throw Finest Hour on there if we want to for +1 to wound. And now all of a sudden we're getting quite a few attacks. We almost have 20 attacks coming out of this Carnosaur. And we're looking at 24 damage versus a 4-up save. Now that's a lot of buffs you're putting into this thing. You may want to dedicate those buffs to other things, but at least we're not spending a lot of support heroes. We're not spending a lot of command points. Nothing else in the army is really going into this profile. And so this is something that you can easily do with a Carnosaur and he doesn't have to worry about anything else in the army. And so you can send this Carnosaur off on its own to do whatever it needs to do. You can give him these free buffs. You're spending 1 command point. You're attacking the right target. And you can actually do some decent damage with this thing. 24 damage on a 4-up save is a great amount of damage for 215 points. I like that. That's what I want to see out of 215 points with some buffs added into it. I'm liking that damage. Now, if you notice, it really does fall off if you're looking at something with a 2 or 3-up save. And that's why I'm not looking to send this into any kind of monster, any kind of hero. Because you're going to lose this buff here from +1 to jaws. But also they're going to be able to save stack pretty well. And you're going to lose a lot of that output. But I think that's my max damage Carno. You could throw some other support heroes on there, like a Star Seer or a Star Priest. But I think every time I end up with those in my army and I have a Carnosaur, I'm using those guys to buff other things. And I never really want to spend those buff pieces on my Carnosaur. And so I'm looking at those things that I can use on my Carnosaur that's on his own, that I can take him as part of a strategy where I have buff pieces over here, I have buff pieces over here, and then I've got my Carnosaur that's doing his own thing and able to go and attack things that I need him to. I think there's some other strategies you can do with the Carnosaur. I think there's like a swift Carnosaur build, and this would almost be like an alpha striking Carnosaur. Now, you don't want this to be your general because he's going to end up getting killed pretty quick. And so you don't want him to be your general, so you're not going to have Prime Warbeast on him. So you're going to lose those attacks, but you can still make them pretty interesting here. So I think you're looking for, I'm going to go destroy some screens from my enemy's army or something, or I'm going to just put some pressure on him turn 1. He's left a flank open. He's left an objective open. I'm going to throw this Carnosaur across the board. And you can do that pretty easily now, turn 1, with this Beastmaster mount trait. And so we're in Coalesce, of course. We got +1 to our jaw attacks. We're exploding our hits. We're charging. We're fighting 7 or less wound models. And this time I'm flipping the Sacred Asterisms over to +1 to run and charge because I want that extra distance with this Carnosaur. I'm also putting the Beastmaster mount trait over to Swift so that I can run and charge at the same time. You probably will have to spend a command point to max that run. Just make sure you do it if you're looking to alpha strike across the board. So with that build, you've got a 10-inch base move on the Carnosaur. You've got a 7-inch run because that's 6-inch max run +1 from the Sacred Asterisms. And then you've got a +1 to charge. So on a standard 24-inch deployment, you're only looking at having to roll a 5-inch charge. Now you're not doing a ton of damage because we've kind of flipped a lot of those buffs off of this Carnosaur or flipped them over to speed. And so you're looking at almost about 12 damage versus a 4-up save, which isn't bad. That'll clear a screen, you know. It'll put a hurt into some unit that maybe they've left exposed. And so this would be a good strategy if you're looking for something in Thunder Lizards to streak across the board. You don't want to send your general across the board because that'll ruin your strategy real quick in a game. But here's a 215-point monster I'm going to throw into your lines. Now you've got to kill him. I'll probably put Finest Hour on him in your turn to make him even harder to kill. Maybe I can throw Mystic Shield on him before I send him across the board so that in your turn he's going to be even tougher to kill. So I think there's a strategy there. It's cheap enough that if he gets killed turn 1, you know, you're okay. That's 215 points. You've caused some problems. You've held him back a little bit. Now you can answer with the rest of your army. So maybe there's some fun there. I think what you'll end up doing the most is just what I labeled here, a situational Carnosaur. And I think what you're doing here is you're adding a few buffs and you're turning things on when you need to do some damage. And so we're going to assume he's charging when you need him to. So you're keeping him back behind a screen. You've got some knights in the way. You've got some skinks in the way. Something like that to where you can charge him when you want him to. We're, of course, spending a command point to explode 6s. We're fighting the target we want to fight. And we're in Coalesce. We get +1 to Jaws. If I know I'm going in with him, this is probably turn 2 or 3. Then I'm putting those Sacred Asterisms over to +1 to attacks for this Carnosaur. I'm also going to flip the mount trait over to Savage for +1 to attacks from the mount. And I'm probably going to pop Finest Hour so I can get that +1 to wound. So here, again, we're only spending 1 command point. He's not our general, so we're not worried about like Prime War Beast or artifacts, those types of things. He can operate on his own, and he's not going to torpedo any of your strategy. But he's still doing respectable output. So you've got almost 22 damage versus a 4-up save. If you're looking at something that has a 3-up save, you're still clearing 15 damage. So that's a good amount of damage there with not a lot of input added. And these are things that, you know, you turn on when you need them. And so you're looking for those opportunities where you can send this Carnosaur in to kill something that you want to. And you flip these switches, you're spending 1 command point, and hopefully you're killing your target that you're looking for. So that's my analysis there of the Carnosaur Beastmaster is what we're calling him. So I think there is a play for putting that Beastmaster command trait on your Carnosaur. I don't think you have to pump everything into him. You can, and it can do some damage. But I think that Situational Carnosaur is probably where you'll end up spending most of the time with this Carnosaur. Give him the buffs you need to, when you need to, and it doesn't really cost you anything. You don't have to take any support heroes, and he'll still do some decent amount of damage. If he gets killed, that's 200 points, 215 points. Not a big deal. You can usually answer back because they're going to have to put quite a bit into him. He's got -1 damage. He's got, in Thunder Lizards, he's got quite a few wounds, and so he will take a punch to some extent. He's still got a 4-up save, which is a shame, but if you plan it right, throw a Mystic Shield on him, it'll be harder to take him down. So in the end, conclusion, I'm going Scarvet. I'm probably going to put Beastmaster on him if I want to use him in that role. But other than that, I'm making all my buffs situational on this Carnosaur, and that's what. Let me know what you guys are doing. Have you had good luck with your Carnosaur? I feel like every time I play him, either I do a ton of damage or you kind of whiff sometimes. I think with this new Beastmaster mount trait, you can kind of smooth out some of those edges. With Finest Hour, you can kind of smooth out some of those edges. When you know you're going in with something, you can apply these free buffs to get the damage that you want to. All right, that's the Carnosaur for today, guys. And we'll catch you on the next one. We'll see you.